I knew things were off when someone hammered a laminated HOA public trail sign into my horse pasture, right next to a pile of fresh manure. That's how it started. One minute I'm fixing a squeaky gate hinge, the next, I'm apparently blocking a sacred community access point that didn't exist yesterday. Then the HOA president showed up, yelling that my gate was emotionally aggressive and lowered nearby home values. I thought it was a prank. It wasn't. Within days, they'd declared me a safety hazard, deployed orange stakes like they were conquering land, and sent a guy with a measuring tape who flinched every time my horse sneezed. All because of a gate. Just a gate. If you've ever had your property turned into a fake park by lunatics with clipboards, drop a comment, because things only get dumber from here. My 12-acre ranch sits like a defiant middle finger in the heart of what used to be a quiet Texas suburb, back before cookie-cutter McMansions sprouted like weeds around my property. The contrast couldn't be more stark, my weathered fence posts and grazing pastures against their pristine lawns that look like they've been cut with nail scissors. My horse, a gentle chestnut mare named Belle, doesn't care about property values or neighborhood aesthetic. She just wants her oats and the freedom to roam, something that apparently offends Natalie's sense of suburban order. The gate I'm securing has stood here for 15 years, long before Natalie moved in with her collection of cats and her dreams of neighborhood domination. The sign hanging from it reads, "Decent folks only," a little joke that's about to become prophetic. "Maxwell Grant, you remove that gate this instant," Natalie shrieks, her voice carrying across the peaceful morning air like nails on a chalkboard. She's dressed in what I can only describe as business casual meets suburban warrior. A blazer that costs more than most people's monthly rent, paired with shoes that have no business being within 50 feet of actual dirt. Her perfectly styled blonde hair bounces with each angry step, and her manicured fingers clutch those papers like they're sacred scrolls handed down from the HOA gods themselves. That gate disrupts the harmony of our community, and as president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, I'm ordering you to remove it immediately. I lean against my gate, polishing the lock with deliberate slowness while Belle continues her breakfast 20 feet away, completely unbothered by the drama unfolding. "Well, hello there, Natalie," I say, letting my voice carry just enough sarcasm to get under her skin. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? Perfect weather for respecting property boundaries." I pull out my boundary map, a laminated document that's become my best friend over the past few months. The surveyor's marks are clear as day. My property line runs a full 10 feet beyond where my gate stands. See this line right here? That's where your authority ends and my freedom begins. This gate sits on my land, which means your HOA can kindly mind its own business. Her face goes from red to purple, a color transformation that would be impressive if it weren't so terrifying. "I don't care what your little map says. The HOA board voted unanimously that gates disrupt neighborhood flow and decrease property values. You're getting a $600 fine, effective immediately." She produces a citation from her blazer pocket, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, except this rabbit bites and costs money. The paper flutters in the morning breeze as she waves it around, and I notice her hands are shaking with either rage or caffeine withdrawal, possibly both. By noon, my email inbox explodes with messages from the HOA board, each one more dramatic than the last. Natalie has branded me a threat to community safety and a flagrant violator of neighborhood standards. The language reads like something from a legal thriller, all whereas clauses and formal declarations that basically amount to "Maxwell bad, gate evil, obey us now." Simon Moore, Natalie's nervous sidekick and former county clerk, shows up around lunchtime with a professional camera, snapping photos of my gate from every conceivable angle while biting his nails down to the quick. He jumps every time Belle snorts or moves, acting like my horse might charge him for the crime of trespassing on my property to document my alleged violations. I spend the afternoon adding a new sign to my gate, this one reading, "HO map sold separately," in bold letters that can be seen from the street. It's petty, sure, but sometimes petty is exactly what the situation calls for. As the sun starts to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold, I notice Natalie's crew has been busy. Bright orange stakes mark what they claim is an HOA community path, running directly through my gate area, complete with laminated signs declaring the space public property. The audacity is breathtaking. They're literally trying to steal my land with nothing more than orange stakes and plastic signs from the hardware store. The real gut punch comes the next morning when I discover my decent folks only sign has been vandalized, with red paint spelling out AONUSU in letters that drip down the metal like blood. The message is clear. This isn't about rules or property values anymore. This is war, and Natalie just fired the first shot. As an ex-military surveyor who spent 5 years mapping disputed territories overseas, I've dealt with boundary conflicts before, but never ones that involved this level of suburban passive aggression. I run my fingers over the defaced sign, feeling anger build in my chest like pressure in a steam boiler. Belle nudges my shoulder with her soft nose, sensing my mood, and I scratch behind her ears while making a silent promise. If Natalie wants to play games with property lines and fake authority, she picked the wrong surveyor to mess with. 3 days after the paint incident, Natalie escalates from petty vandalism to full-blown fraud by hiring what she claims is a certified surveyor to challenge my boundary measurements. He pulls up in a duct-taped pickup, hauling survey gear straight out of a yard sale circa the 1990s. His name is Chuck something or other, and he spends exactly 20 minutes walking around my property before declaring that my gate sits 10 feet into HOA territory. The whole performance would be laughable if it weren't so obviously scripted, complete with Natalie hovering nearby like a director, making sure her actor hits his marks. Chuck nods vigorously at everything she says, probably already counting the cash she slipped him for this amateur hour production. The emergency HOA meeting takes place that evening in the community center, a beige brick building that manages to suck the soul out of any gathering held within its walls. Natalie mandated business attire, blazers only, to discuss my gate's existence, as if wardrobe validates nonsense. I show up in my favorite flannel shirt and work boots, partly because it's comfortable and partly because I know it'll make Natalie's eye twitch. The community room fills with about 30 residents, most wearing the required blazers and looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Natalie commands the front of the room like a general addressing troops, her presentation board covered with photos of my gate from angles that make it look somehow menacing. "Ladies and gentlemen," she begins, her voice dripping with manufactured authority, "we face a crisis that threatens the very fabric of our community." She gestures dramatically at the photos, each one showing my innocent gate from a different perspective. This unauthorized barrier has created a safety hazard that endangers our children and diminishes our property values. My surveyor has confirmed that the gate encroaches 10 feet into community property, making it a clear violation of our covenants. Chuck nods vigorously from the back row, probably already counting his payday for this performance. The whole scene feels like watching community theater where everyone forgot their lines. I stand up slowly, my boundary map crackling as I unfold it for the room to see. The map displays my property lines with mathematical precision, each measurement verified by GPS coordinates and recorded with the county clerk's office. My gate sits entirely on my land, which means your surveyor either needs glasses or a new career, I announce, letting the official documentation speak for itself. The evidence is overwhelming. My property extends well beyond where my gate stands, and no amount of creative interpretation can change those facts. A few chuckles ripple through the crowd as residents lean forward to examine my county-certified documentation that demolishes Chuck's fraudulent claims. Simon Moore shoots up from his seat like a jack-in-the-box, his nervous energy practically vibrating through the room. "His gate scares children. It's threatening," he blurts, cracking mid-sentence like always. The accusation hangs in the air for exactly 3 seconds before several residents start whispering among themselves. Some nod in agreement with Simon's assessment, while others roll their eyes at the obvious exaggeration. My decent folks only sign hardly qualifies as threatening, unless you're the type of person who finds basic property rights intimidating, which apparently describes Simon perfectly. Lila Bennett speaks up from the middle section with a grin that promises trouble for Natalie's narrative. Natalie would ban sunshine if it didn't match the HOA color palette, she quips, drawing genuine laughter from the crowd. Her comment cuts through the manufactured drama like a knife through butter, and I notice Natalie's jaw clench with barely controlled rage. The room's energy shifts as residents remember that this whole conflict started over a gate that sits on private property and threatens absolutely no one except Natalie's ego. The meeting devolves from there, with Natalie's supporters demanding I remove the gate immediately while others question the validity of Chuck's survey work. Natalie pounds her gavel. Yes, she actually bought herself a gavel, and threatens to call for a vote to have me forcibly removed from the community. The irony isn't lost on me that she's threatening to kick me out of a neighborhood built around my family's original ranch land, but pointing that out would probably make her head explode. By the time the meeting ends, the community has split into clear factions. Team Natalie, who believe rules exist to be followed regardless of logic, and Team Common Sense, who think maybe a gate on private property isn't the end of civilization. The next morning brings fresh horror in the form of orange stakes driven into my pasture, each one marked with HOA zone signs that claim jurisdiction over land my family has owned since the 1970s. Natalie's crew worked under cover of darkness like some kind of suburban special forces unit, planting their flags of conquest across my property line. The stakes form a rough perimeter that would encompass not just my gate, but a significant portion of my grazing area, effectively stealing chunks of my ranch for the greater good of HOA authority. Belle snorts and shies away from the orange intrusions, her horse sense correctly identifying them as threats to our peaceful existence. I spend the afternoon building what I generously call a fence, but what's really just a 3-inch wide strip of wire running along my actual property line. The accompanying sign reads, HOA, measure twice, cry once, in letters big enough to be read from the street. Lila stops by around dinner time, camera in hand, providing commentary about Natalie's latest power grab. Natalie's surveyor couldn't find his way out of a paper bag with GPS coordinates, and a team of bloodhounds, she quips, capturing me polishing my gate for her blog documentation. That evening, I make the decision to hire Rebecca Santos, a licensed surveyor with 20 years of experience and a reputation for precision that makes Swiss watchmakers look sloppy. If Natalie wants to play the expert game, I'll bring in the real deal to expose Chuck's amateur hour performance. As I drift off to sleep, Belle grazing peacefully in the moonlight beyond my window, I imagine the look on Natalie's face when a real professional demolishes her fraudulent claims. But that satisfying fantasy gets interrupted around 2 in the morning when motion sensor lights flood my property and my security camera starts recording something that will change everything. The motion sensors trip at exactly 2:37 a.m., flooding my property in white light that turns night into artificial day. My security camera captures every detail as Simon Moore stumbles across my land like a discount ninja, bolt cutters in hand and determination in his hunched shoulders. He's dressed in all black, which might have helped him blend into the darkness if he hadn't forgotten about the motion sensor lights I installed after the paint incident. The irony is beautiful. He trips over my HOA jump scares free sign and goes down hard, bolt cutters flying into the dirt while he scrambles to get back on his feet. I watch from my bedroom window as Simon approaches my gate with the subtlety of a drunk elephant, his nail-biting nervous energy amplified by what's clearly his first attempt at breaking and entering. The camera angle captures his face perfectly when the lights hit, his expression shifting from determined concentration to deer-in-headlights panic in the span of a heartbeat. He glances around frantically, probably wondering if he should abort the mission, but commitment to Natalie's cause wins out over common sense. The bolt cutters make quick work of my lock, and he pushes the gate open with what I assume he thinks is triumphant satisfaction. What he doesn't notice is the backup camera hidden in Belle's favorite oak tree, recording his every move from a second angle. The confrontation comes the next morning, when I approach Simon at his mailbox, coffee in hand and footage queued up on my phone. He's already dressed for another day of serving Natalie's agenda, his button-down shirt crisp and his nervous energy crackling like static electricity. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Simon?" I say, keeping my voice friendly while his face goes pale as printer paper. Perfect weather for discussing property crimes and criminal trespassing charges. His fingers immediately start working at his cuticles, a habit that's probably cost him thousands in manicure bills over the years. The man couldn't lie his way out of a paper bag if his life depended on it, and right now, his life might actually depend on it. "I don't know what you're talking about, Maxwell," he stammers, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old boy asking someone to prom. "I was home all night watching late-night television and definitely not anywhere near your property doing anything that might be construed as illegal or inappropriate." The denial comes out in a rushed stream of consciousness that basically amounts to a confession with extra steps. His hands shake as he fumbles with his mail, dropping bills and catalogs all over his pristine driveway, while sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Natalie arrives exactly on schedule, probably summoned by Simon's panicked text message about being caught red-handed. She emerges from her house like a queen gracing peasants with her presence, wearing another blazer that costs more than most people's car payments and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who's never faced real consequences for her actions. "Maxwell, I understand you're harassing my board members now," she says, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that works on people who don't know any better. Your gate has created an unsafe situation that required immediate action for the protection of our community. If Simon felt compelled to secure the area, it's only because you've created a hostile environment. I pull out my phone and let the footage speak for itself, watching their faces change as Simon's midnight adventure plays out in high-definition glory. The audio captures every grunt and stumble, every muttered curse when he trips over my sign, and every detail of his criminal activity. Funny thing about security cameras, I say, pausing the video at the moment Simon's face is perfectly illuminated by the motion lights. They're really good at turning "I don't know what you're talking about" into "please don't press charges." Natalie's confident expression crumbles as she realizes her perfect little scheme has been documented with the kind of evidence that makes prosecutors smile. Deputy Cameron Larson arrives 20 minutes later, his patrol car crunching over gravel as he parks near my gate with the weary expression of a man who's dealt with too many HOA disputes. He's pushing 50 with graying hair and the kind of patience that comes from years of mediating neighbor disputes over fence heights and barking dogs. "Let me guess," he says, climbing out of his cruiser with a heavy sigh. "HOA drama involving property lines and hurt feelings?" I show him the footage while Natalie hovers nearby like a vulture waiting for roadkill, probably hoping Cameron will somehow declare video evidence inadmissible in the court of suburban justice. Cameron watches the entire recording twice, his expression shifting from bored resignation to professional interest as Simon's crime spree unfolds on my phone screen. "That's pretty clear-cut breaking and entering," he says, making notes in his little notebook while Simon's face goes from pale to green. "Though I'll need proof that Mrs. Tucker ordered the vandalism before I can charge her as an accessory." Natalie seizes on this legal technicality like a lifeline, declaring her complete innocence and suggesting that Simon acted alone in some kind of property rights-induced mental breakdown. The performance is Oscar-worthy, complete with hand-wringing concern for Simon's obvious psychological instability. That afternoon brings a new development that would be hilarious if it weren't so hypocritical. Natalie announces a community-wide ban on chicken ownership, citing noise concerns and property value impacts, while simultaneously walking her collection of 10 cats through the neighborhood like she's leading a furry parade. The cats roam freely across everyone's property, leaving deposits in gardens and terrorizing the local bird population. But apparently that's different because cats are sophisticated pets, according to Natalie's newly revised community standards. She even starts live streaming her evening neighborhood patrols, broadcasting her views on property maintenance and community standards to an audience that consists mainly of her sister in Oklahoma and 3 confused strangers who stumbled across her stream by accident. The live stream becomes appointment viewing for anyone who enjoys watching authority figures slowly lose their grip on reality. Natalie marches through the neighborhood with her phone propped up on a selfie stick, providing commentary on everyone's lawn care and architectural choices, while her cats follow behind like a furry entourage. As you can see, viewers, Maxwell Grant's hostile gait continues to threaten our community's harmony, she says, gesturing dramatically at my perfectly normal property entrance. His aggressive signage and intimidating presence have created an atmosphere of fear that no child should have to endure. The fact that 3 kids are currently playing soccer in the field next to my gate while Belle watches benevolently from the fence line seems to escape her notice entirely. I install a gate siren that evening, a motion-activated device that plays a cheerful chime whenever someone approaches my property line without permission. It's legal, it's non-threatening, and it serves as an excellent early warning system for future midnight visits from HOA enforcement teams. The first test comes around dinner time when Simon approaches to check for compliance violations and triggers a melodic alarm that sends him scrambling backward into Mrs. Patterson's rose bushes. Lila captures the entire incident on camera, adding it to her growing collection of HOA overreach documentation that's starting to attract attention from local news outlets. The chapter ends with my security camera catching something that changes the entire game. Around 11 p.m., Simon returns with a crowbar and what looks like a surveyor's measuring tape, but this time he's not targeting my gate. Instead, he heads for the old stone boundary marker that sat undisturbed near my property line since the 1970s, the one that proves definitively where my land ends and community property begins. The camera captures him struggling to move the heavy stone, grunting with effort as he tries to reposition it several feet closer to my house. What he doesn't realize is that moving a boundary marker isn't just vandalism, it's fraud. And in Texas, that's a felony that carries serious time. The smoking gun comes in the form of a black and white photograph from 1973, tucked away in my father's old survey files like a time capsule waiting to be discovered. The image shows the original stone boundary marker in its proper position, clearly marked with GPS coordinates and bearing the inscription Ranch Lot 7, my family's original designation in the county records. I spread the photograph across my kitchen table like a poker player revealing a royal flush, knowing that this single piece of evidence will demolish Natalie's entire house of cards. The stone in the photo sits exactly where it should, according to my current survey, which means Simon's midnight construction project moved it approximately 8 feet toward my house, effectively stealing a significant chunk of my property through crude forgery. The next HOA meeting happens on a Thursday evening, and I arrive fashionably late, with my evidence folder tucked under my arm like a prosecutor heading to court. The community center buzzes with nervous energy as residents whisper about the escalating property dispute that's turned their quiet neighborhood into a suburban battle. Natalie holds court at the front of the room, gesturing dramatically at a new presentation board covered with photos that supposedly prove my gate's illegal status. Her confidence radiates through the room like heat from a furnace, and she basks in the attention of her supporters, who nod along with every word like disciples receiving gospel truth. Before we continue with tonight's agenda, I announce, my voice cutting through Natalie's monologue like a knife through butter, I have some evidence that I think everyone should see. The room falls silent as I walk to the front, my boots echoing on the linoleum floor with each deliberate step. Natalie's expression shifts from confident authority to barely concealed panic as I produce the 1973 photograph and place it on the easel where everyone can. This is what the boundary marker looked like when it was installed 52 years ago. And here's where Simon Moore tried to move it 3 nights ago. I add the security camera footage to my presentation, letting the room watch as Simon struggles to reposition the stone under cover of darkness. The reaction is immediate and explosive. Gasps ripple through the crowd as residents realize they're witnessing actual fraud being documented in real time. Natalie shoots to her feet like she's been launched from a catapult, her face cycling through shades of red that would make a sunset jealous. Those photos could be fake. Maxwell could have doctored that footage to make Simon look guilty, she shrieks, her voice cracking with the strain of maintaining her innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence. Her accusation hangs in the air for exactly 3 seconds before Simon himself destroys any chance of plausible deniability. I was just following orders, Simon blurts out, his nail-biting nervousness finally overcoming his loyalty to Natalie's cause. She told me the marker was in the wrong place and needed to be corrected for the good of the community. He lunges across the room toward my evidence folder, probably hoping to destroy the photograph that proves his guilt, but trips over his own feet and crashes into a folding chair with a metallic clang that echoes through the suddenly silent room. The desperation in his movements tells the whole story. This isn't the behavior of an innocent man defending his actions. This is panic in its purest form. The crowd erupts in a mixture of cheers and outraged shouting as the truth sinks in. Residents who've been quietly enduring Natalie's increasingly tyrannical rule suddenly find their voices, calling for her resignation and demanding answers about what other corrections she's made to community property over the years. Margaret Williams, an elderly woman who's lived in the neighborhood since before Natalie moved in, stands up with fire in her eyes. I knew something was wrong when my property tax assessment changed last year. Did you move my markers too, Natalie? The question opens floodgates as other residents start comparing notes about mysterious property line adjustments and sudden changes to lot boundaries. Natalie's damage control attempt involves a live stream that night, broadcast from her living room while she wears yet another blazer and attempts to paint herself as the victim of my malicious campaign of harassment. The performance begins with her sitting primly on her couch, hands folded in her lap like a politician about to confess to campaign finance violations. My fellow community members, she begins, her voice dripping with false sincerity, I want to address the vicious lies being spread about my dedication to our neighborhood's well-being. The speech might have been convincing if one of her cats hadn't chosen that exact moment to leap onto her laptop, ending the live stream with a close-up view of orange tabby fur and a very startled feline expression. By Friday morning, I have a restraining order against both Natalie and Simon, prohibiting them from approaching my property or interfering with my boundary markers under penalty of immediate arrest. The legal paperwork feels satisfying in my hands, like holding a shield that finally gives me some protection against their escalating harassment campaign. Deputy Cameron serves the papers personally, his expression suggesting that he's enjoying this part of his job more than usual. "Maybe now we can get some peace and quiet around here," he says, adjusting his utility belt with the satisfaction of a man who's finally able to take concrete action against neighborhood nonsense. The real revelation comes Saturday afternoon, when I discover something that changes everything I thought I knew about this dispute. While examining the repositioned boundary stone more carefully, I noticed that the concrete base extends deeper underground than it should for a simple property marker. Careful excavation reveals that the stone sits directly on top of what used to be Natalie's driveway before she had it repaved last spring. The implication hits me like a lightning bolt. The boundary marker was always in the correct position, which means Natalie's entire lot sits on what should legally be my property. She didn't just steal 8 feet of my land, she's been living on my ranch for the past 3 years without paying rent. The stone bears an inscription that I'd never noticed before, partially buried under decades of accumulated dirt and debris. Using a soft brush and careful cleaning, I revealed the words Ranch Lot 7, Survey Point Alpha, carved into the granite surface. A quick check of the county records confirms what I already suspected. Survey Point Alpha marks the northwestern corner of my family's original ranch property, which means Natalie's house, her driveway, her perfectly manicured lawn, and her collection of decorative garden gnomes all sit squarely on land that belongs to me. The irony is so perfect, it feels like cosmic justice delivered with a surveyor's precision. I spend Saturday evening on my porch, polishing my gate one more time while Belle grazes peacefully in the pasture that I now know extends well beyond what I'd previously believed. The setting sun paints the sky in shades of orange and gold, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood feels peaceful. Tomorrow, I'll present this new evidence to Deputy Cameron and let the legal system sort out exactly how much of Natalie's property is actually mine. But tonight, I'm content to sit with my horse and enjoy the satisfaction of a job well done. The gate that started this whole mess gleams in the fading light, its decent folks only sign catching the breeze like a flag of victory. Natalie's desperation reaches new heights Monday morning when she announces a community land access emergency that requires immediate intervention from concerned citizens. Her latest scheme involves claiming that my gate blocks her legal right-of-ways to a portion of community property that she insists connects to her backyard. The claim is bogus from every conceivable angle. There's no easement, no recorded right-of-ways, and certainly no legal precedent for breaking down someone's gate because you feel entitled to walk through their property. But logic has never been Natalie's strong suit, and she's betting that enough noise and drama will somehow transform her fabricated crisis into actual legal standing. The protest she organizes for Tuesday afternoon looks like something from a comedy sketch about suburban activism gone wrong. 37 residents show up carrying handmade signs that initially read "Stop Maxwell's Gate Tyranny" and "Open Community Access Now." But a sudden gust of Texas wind flips half the signs backward to reveal "Save Maxwell's Rights" and "Protect Property Owners" written on the reverse side. The mix-up happens because Lila Bennett secretly convinced several protesters that the signs were double-sided, leading to a confusing scene where half the crowd appears to be supporting me while the other half demands my destruction. Rebecca Santos, my licensed surveyor, arrives precisely at 2 p.m. with professional equipment that makes Chuck's garage sale tools look like toys from a cereal box. She sets up her transit and begins taking precise measurements while Natalie's protesters mill around uncertainly, their chanting gradually dying down as it becomes obvious that actual surveying work doesn't care about their feelings or demands. Rebecca works with the methodical precision of someone who spent 20 years settling property disputes, each measurement recorded with GPS coordinates and documented with photographs that will hold up in any court in Texas. Her findings are devastating to Natalie's claims. There's no easement, no right-of-ways, and certainly no legal basis for demanding access through my property. The protest takes a surreal turn when several participants decide to physically chain themselves to my gate, apparently believing that passive resistance will somehow change the legal reality of property ownership. Mrs. Henderson, a 73-year-old retiree who probably hasn't protested anything since the Vietnam War, wraps herself in bicycle chains with the determination of someone fighting for civil rights instead of HOA expansion. Her grandson Tommy helps secure the chains while taking selfies that he immediately posts online with hashtags like Gatoristance and Property Revolution. The scene would be touching if it weren't completely insane, and I find myself torn between admiration for their commitment and concern for their basic understanding of property law. Deputy Cameron arrives with backup, probably figuring that a situation involving chained protesters and property disputes might require additional manpower to prevent things from escalating into actual violence. He surveys the scene with the weary expression of a man who's seen too many neighborhood conflicts turn into federal cases over minor grievances. "Let me guess," he says, approaching me while the protesters continue their chanting. "Someone decided that property rights are optional when they conflict with community access?" I hand him Rebecca's preliminary survey results, which confirm everything my original documentation already proved. My gate sits entirely on my property, and Natalie's claims have no legal foundation whatsoever. The protest reaches peak chaos around 4 p.m. when Natalie attempts to live stream the event from her phone, probably hoping to document police brutality or property owner oppression for her vast audience of 3 confused viewers. She holds the phone at arm's length while marching back and forth in front of my gate, providing running commentary about community rights and property access that sounds like she's reading from a legal dictionary without understanding any of the words. The performance might have been convincing if her orange tabby cat hadn't escaped from her house and chosen that exact moment to leap onto her head, sending her phone flying into the dirt while she scrambles to catch both her cat and her dignity. Lila's blog post goes live during the protest, featuring the complete duck diary that she discovered in the community center's storage room last week. The diary belongs to Harold Pembroke, a former resident who moved away after Natalie's harassment campaign convinced him that fighting HOA tyranny wasn't worth the stress and legal fees. His entries detail years of Natalie's escalating demands, arbitrary rule changes, and systematic bullying of residents who dared to question her authority. The most damning entry describes how Natalie convinced Simon to adjust boundary markers throughout the neighborhood to maximize HOA-controlled territory, effectively stealing small parcels of land from multiple homeowners over several years. The crowd's energy shifts dramatically as residents read Harold's diary entries on their phones, realizing that my gate dispute is just the latest chapter in Natalie's long-running campaign to expand HOA control through fraud and intimidation. Several protesters unlock their chains and walk away, their enthusiasm for community access evaporating as they discover that they've been supporting a woman who's been systematically stealing their neighbor's property for years. Mrs. Henderson remains chained to my gate, but now she's reading the diary entries instead of chanting slogans, her expression growing more horrified with each revelation about Natalie's methods. I spend the afternoon sitting on my porch with Belle grazing nearby, watching the protests slowly dissolve as reality intrudes on Natalie's carefully constructed narrative. My gate siren provides occasional musical accompaniment when protesters get too close to the motion sensors, creating a soundtrack that's both annoying and oddly appropriate for the absurdist theater unfolding on my property. Rebecca finishes her survey work around 5 p.m., packing up her equipment with the satisfaction of someone who's just documented irrefutable evidence that will settle this dispute once and for all. The real bombshell drops when I discover something extraordinary in my father's old survey equipment, stored in the barn since his retirement 15 years ago. Tucked inside a case of measuring tools is a reel-to-reel tape from 1965, labeled Meadowbrook Ranch Survey Final Boundaries. The tape player still works, crackling to life with voices from nearly 60 years ago, as county surveyors discuss property lines and lot designations for what would eventually become our neighborhood. Most interesting is a conversation between the lead surveyor and Simon's father, discussing how certain lots were adjusted to create more community space, with Simon's dad suggesting that no one will ever check these old records anyway. The tape reveals that Simon's family has been involved in boundary fraud for 2 generations, with his father helping to steal ranch land in the 1960s, and Simon continuing the tradition in the present day. The recorded conversation includes specific details about moving boundary markers and falsifying lot descriptions, creating a pattern of deception that spans 6 decades and multiple property transactions. As I listen to voices from the past discussing the same crimes being committed today, I realize that this tape doesn't just prove Natalie's guilt, it exposes a conspiracy that goes back to the original subdivision of our neighborhood. The protest officially ends when Deputy Cameron announces that anyone remaining chained to private property after 6 p.m. will be arrested for trespassing and obstruction. Mrs. Henderson finally unlocks herself and shuffles home, probably wondering how a simple gate dispute turned into a documentary about generational property fraud. Natalie retreats to her house with her rescued cat, her live stream audience having dwindled to zero after her phone took a dirt bath during the feline interruption. As darkness falls over the neighborhood, I sit on my porch with the 1965 tape in my hands, knowing that tomorrow will bring the final confrontation that settles this dispute once and for all. Wednesday morning dawns clear and bright, the kind of perfect Texas day that makes you glad to be alive and even gladder to own ranch property in the heart of suburbia. I arrive at the community center carrying my evidence like a prosecutor heading to the trial of the century. The 1973 photograph, Rebecca's official survey results, and most importantly, the 1965 tape that documents 60 years of boundary fraud perpetrated by the Moore family and their co-conspirators. The parking lot fills with residents who've heard rumors about major revelations in the ongoing gate controversy, and the energy in the air feels electric with anticipation. The crowd gathering outside the community center includes familiar faces from both sides of the dispute, plus several new attendees who've been drawn by Lila's blog coverage and the promise of watching HOA corruption get exposed in real time. Deputy Cameron arrives early, probably figuring that any meeting involving boundary fraud evidence and angry neighbors might require official supervision to prevent vigilante justice. He nods to me as I pass, his expression suggesting that he's looking forward to finally having enough evidence to file actual charges against the people who've been wasting his time with property line nonsense for months. Inside the community center, Natalie has set up what can only be described as a war room, complete with presentation boards, legal documents, and a microphone system that makes her voice echo through the beige brick walls like a dictator addressing the masses. She's wearing her most authoritative blazer, the navy blue one that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, and her confidence radiates through the room, like she's already won some battle that the rest of us don't know we're fighting. Simon hovers nearby with his usual nail-biting nervousness, amplified to panic levels, probably sensing that today's meeting won't end with another meaningless fine or empty threat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announce, my voice cutting through Natalie's prepared remarks like a chainsaw through plywood. "Before we waste any more time on fabricated property disputes, I have some evidence that everyone needs to see and hear." The room falls silent as I walk to the front, my boots clicking on the linoleum with each deliberate step. I place the boundary stone on the table where everyone can see it. Its carved inscription, Lot 7, Survey Point Alpha, clearly visible after my careful cleaning work, removed decades of accumulated dirt and deliberate concealment. The stone itself tells a story that no amount of HOA rhetoric can contradict. Rebecca's laser measurements confirm that it sits in its original position as established in 1973. Which means every boundary adjustment made since then has been fraudulent. I hold up the photograph showing the stone's original placement, letting the room compare the image to the physical evidence sitting on the table. "This boundary marker has been in the same position for 52 years, I explain, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. Every attempt to move it or claim it's in the wrong place has been an act of fraud designed to steal property from legitimate owners." Natalie explodes from her seat like a rocket launching into orbit, her face cycling through shades of red that would impress a stoplight. "You can't prove any of this. That stone could have been moved by anyone at any time. You're manufacturing evidence to support your illegal gate installation." Her voice cracks with the strain of maintaining innocence in the face of overwhelming proof, and her hands shake as she gestures wildly at my evidence display. The desperation in her movements tells everyone in the room exactly how guilty she knows she is, and her protests only make the evidence more damning. Simon's collapse happens in slow motion, like watching a controlled demolition of a building that was never structurally sound to begin with. "I just moved it back where Natalie said it belonged," he blurts out, his voice carrying across the silent room like a confession broadcast on speakers. "She told me the marker had been moved from its original position and needed to be corrected for community safety." His admission hangs in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats before the room erupts in angry shouting from residents who've just realized they've been victims of systematic property theft. The tape player crackles to life when I press play, filling the community center with voices from 1965 discussing boundary adjustments and lot manipulations that sound exactly like what Simon and Natalie have been doing for the past several years. The recorded conversation between county surveyors and Simon's father includes specific details about moving markers and falsifying property records, creating a pattern of multi-generational fraud that spans 6 decades. Simon's face goes pale as printer paper when he hears his father's voice describing the same crimes he's been committing, probably realizing for the first time that his family's property corrections have always been theft disguised as community service. Natalie's final desperate gambit involves grabbing the microphone and attempting to confess her way out of criminal charges by claiming she genuinely believed her actions were legal and proper. "I may have made mistakes in interpreting property boundaries," she says, her voice echoing through the room with false humility, "but everything I did was for the betterment of our community and the protection of property values." The confession might have generated sympathy if she hadn't spent months threatening residents with fines and legal action for questioning her authority, but you can't build a career on bullying and then claim ignorance when you get caught. Deputy Cameron steps forward with handcuffs that gleam under the community center's fluorescent lights, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal relief that this neighborhood dispute can finally be resolved through actual law enforcement rather than endless mediation. "Natalie Tucker, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and destruction of property," he announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's finally able to take concrete action against criminal behavior. The Miranda rights echo through the silent room as residents watch their former HOA president get escorted out in handcuffs, probably wondering how they ever thought following her leadership was a good idea. I unlock my gate with deliberate ceremony, the click of the mechanism echoing across the neighborhood like a declaration of independence from HOA tyranny. The siren plays its cheerful melody one final time as I push the gate open, symbolically and literally clearing the path for anyone decent enough to respect property rights and basic human dignity. Belle trots over from her grazing spot to investigate the commotion, her soft nose nudging my shoulder as if to say, "Congratulations on winning a battle that never should have been necessary in the first place." The real victory comes when Lila's blog posts the audio from Natalie's taped confession, recorded during her live stream attempt when she thought admitting guilt would somehow generate sympathy from her audience. The confession includes specific details about ordering Simon to move boundary markers, falsifying property records, and systematically intimidating residents who questioned her authority. Within hours, the audio goes viral in HOA horror story circles, becoming a cautionary tale about what happens when petty authority figures convince themselves that rules don't apply to their behavior. As evening settles over the neighborhood, I sit on my porch, with Belle grazing peacefully nearby and my gate standing open as a symbol of victory over bureaucratic oppression. The boundary stone sits in its proper position, marking the same property line it's marked for 52 years. And Natalie's house sits empty after she made bail and immediately moved in with her sister in Oklahoma, rather than face the neighbors she's been systematically defrauding. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and probably new HOA drama. But tonight belongs to property rights, common sense, and the simple satisfaction of proving that truth always wins when you have the evidence to back it up. The formal dissolution of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association happens on a Friday morning that feels like Christmas, New Year's, and the 4th of July rolled into one spectacular celebration of freedom from tyrannical bureaucracy. The emergency meeting draws every resident in the neighborhood, plus several reporters who've been following Lila's blog coverage of what local news outlets are calling the Great Gate Conspiracy. Deputy Cameron arrives with a stack of legal documents that officially terminate Natalie's authority and return property rights to their rightful owners, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with obvious relief that he'll no longer have to mediate disputes over fence heights and chicken ownership. The criminal charges against Natalie read like a greatest hits collection of HOA overreach. Fraud in the first degree for falsifying boundary records, conspiracy to commit theft for the systematic property-grabbing scheme, destruction of property for the paint vandalism and lot cutting, and criminal impersonation for claiming legal authority she never actually possessed. Simon faces similar charges as a co-conspirator, though his lawyer is arguing for reduced sentences based on his obvious mental instability and complete inability to function without someone telling him what to do every minute of every day. The plea negotiations should be interesting, considering that his confession was recorded and broadcast to 37 witnesses in the community center. Natalie's house officially becomes part of my ranch property after Rebecca's final survey confirms that the entire structure sits on land that was illegally transferred during the original neighborhood development in the 1970s. The county records show that Simon's father and his surveyor accomplices stole approximately 2 acres of ranch land through fraudulent boundary adjustments, incorporating the stolen property into what would eventually become Natalie's lot. The irony is perfect. The woman who spent years trying to steal my land through HOA overreach has been living on my property the entire time, essentially squatting in a house built on stolen ranch territory. I decide to convert Natalie's former house into a duck pond, partly because the neighborhood needs more wildlife habitat, and partly because the symbolism is too perfect to resist. The excavation work begins Monday morning, with heavy equipment that tears up Natalie's pristine lawn and removes the decorative garden gnomes that probably violated 17 different HOA rules when she installed them. Belle watches the construction with obvious approval, her horse sense correctly identifying the removal of suburban pretension as a positive development for the overall ranch ecosystem. Lila Bennett emerges as the natural leader for forming a new community organization based on actual property rights rather than made-up authority and arbitrary rule enforcement. Her first act as elected coordinator is to establish a simple principle. Everyone minds their own business and respects their neighbor's property boundaries, with disputes resolved through actual law enforcement rather than kangaroo court proceedings in community centers. The new organization has exactly 3 rules. Don't steal your neighbor's land, don't vandalize other people's property, and don't pretend to have authority that you don't actually possess. It's amazing how much clearer life becomes when you eliminate bureaucratic nonsense and focus on basic human decency. The Duck Diaries author, Harold Pembroke, returns to the neighborhood after learning about Natalie's arrest and the HOA's dissolution through Lila's blog coverage. He'd been living in Arizona for the past 3 years, having sold his house and moved away rather than continue fighting Natalie's systematic harassment campaign. His first-hand testimony about decades of boundary manipulation and resident intimidation provides prosecutors with additional evidence for the criminal cases, while his return to the neighborhood symbolizes the victory of common sense over HOA tyranny. Harold's first act upon returning is to help me install a new sign on my gate reading, "No HOA Tyrants. This means you, Natalie." The duck pond thrives beyond my wildest expectations, attracting not just waterfowl, but also families of deer, various songbirds, and even a pair of red-tailed hawks who've established a nest in the oak tree that used to overlook Natalie's driveway. Belle has developed a friendship with the ducks, often standing at the pond's edge like a gentle giant, protecting smaller creatures from the dangers of suburban life. The transformation from manicured lawn to natural habitat represents everything this victory means, replacing artificial control with organic growth, trading bureaucratic oppression for natural harmony. Simon's confession during his plea hearing reveals the full scope of the multi-generational property fraud that his family perpetrated on behalf of various HOA boards over 6 decades. His father's surveying business specialized in adjusting property boundaries to create more community space, effectively stealing small parcels from individual homeowners and transferring them to HOA control. The systematic theft involved dozens of properties throughout the county, with Simon continuing his father's work until my gate dispute finally exposed the entire operation. The investigation is ongoing, but early estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of dollars in property value was stolen through fraudulent boundary manipulations. I spend most evenings sitting on my porch, with Belle grazing nearby and the duck pond reflecting sunset colors like a mirror designed by nature instead of committee. The gate that started this entire conflict stands open most of the time now, its decent folks only sign serving as both welcome mat and warning to anyone who might consider resuming Natalie's legacy of neighborhood tyranny. The motion sensor siren still works perfectly, providing occasional entertainment when delivery drivers get startled by cheerful chimes, but mostly the technology sits idle in a neighborhood that's finally learned to respect property boundaries. The legal settlement includes compensation for years of harassment, property damage, and the emotional distress of fighting bureaucratic oppression without adequate legal support. Natalie's assets barely cover the damages she caused, but the financial compensation matters less than the principle of holding accountable people who abuse manufactured authority to harass their neighbors. Her blazer collection gets donated to charity, probably bringing joy to someone who needs professional clothing more than she needed costumes for playing dictator in a suburban community center. The most surprising discovery comes during excavation work for expanding the duck pond, when my crew uncovers another boundary marker buried directly under where my gate's foundation was poured 15 years ago. This stone is older than the others, carved with symbols that predate the official county surveying system, and its inscription reads, "HOA's not done," in letters that look freshly chiseled, despite being hidden underground for decades. The message sends chills down my spine as I realize that someone planned this entire conflict long before Natalie moved to the neighborhood, setting up a scenario that would inevitably lead to the discovery of systematic property fraud spanning multiple generations. The marker's warning proves prophetic when I receive a certified letter from something called the Regional Property Management Consortium, claiming authority over all former HOA territories in the county and demanding immediate compliance with their expanded community standards. The letter includes threats of legal action if I don't remove my gate, eliminate the duck pond, and submit to their jurisdiction within 30 days. Reading the demands, I can't help but smile as I reach for my phone to call Lila, Deputy Cameron, and Rebecca Santos. Apparently, the war for property rights isn't over, it's just moving to a bigger battlefield with higher stakes and more powerful enemies. Looking out at my ranch, with Belle grazing peacefully beside the thriving duck pond and my gate standing proudly open under the Texas sky, I feel ready for whatever comes next. The fight for basic property rights and human dignity never really ends. But at least now, I know that truth, evidence, and determination can defeat even the most entrenched bureaucratic oppression. If you've got your own HOA horror story or property rights battle, drop a comment below and let me know how you're fighting back. Sometimes the best defense against tyranny is sharing your story and proving that decent folks don't have to tolerate indecent behavior from people who mistake temporary authority for permanent power. Until next time, keep your gates locked, your boundaries marked, and your evidence documented. You never know when you'll need to prove that your property belongs to you.